Kang Ho walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Senate chamber for the first time. His human eyes went wide as he looked up at the enormous dome above him. The ceiling was made of clear crystal that showed the stars of 1,000 worlds. Around him, beings from 847 different species sat in their special seats. Some aliens looked like giant insects with wings that sparkled in the light. Others were made of living rock that glowed with soft colors. There were creatures that floated in tanks of water and beings that looked like walking trees. Kang Ho had studied pictures of them all, but seeing them in person was something else. "Amazing, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Kang Ho turned to see Li Yuna, a woman with kind eyes and gray hair. She had been working as a human diplomat for 30 years. "I still remember my first day here. I threw up from excitement." Kang Ho laughed nervously. "I might do the same thing." Li Yuna smiled and pointed to the center of the chamber. "See that speaking platform down there? That's where the magic happens, well, where it used to happen anyway." As they walked to their seats in the human section, Kang Ho noticed something strange. The other species were very quiet. When they did speak, they used short, careful words. They all seemed to agree with each other about everything. No one argued or raised their voice. "Why is everyone so polite?" Kang Ho asked. "That's what I need to tell you about," Li Yuna said as they sat down. "You see, we humans have a special privilege here. We're the only species allowed to speak freely during meetings." Kang Ho looked confused. "What do you mean?" Before Li Yuna could answer, a tall being made of blue crystal walked to the speaking platform. This was Vexathara, one of the record keepers for the Senate. Vexathara's voice sounded like music when it spoke. "Today we will discuss the new trade rules for the Outer Rim worlds," Vexathara announced. "All species will present their agreements in the proper order." One by one, different aliens stood up and spoke. Each one said almost the same thing. They all agreed that the trade rules were good. They all said they supported the plan. No one asked questions or suggested changes. Kang Ho whispered to Li Yuna, "This is boring. Don't they have any other ideas?" "Shh," Li Yuna said. "Just watch." Then it was time for the humans to speak. A man named Park Min-ho stood up and walked to the platform. He was young with dark hair and looked confident. "I think these trade rules have problems," Park Min-ho said in a clear voice. "The tax rates are too high for small businesses. This will hurt families on poor worlds." Kang Ho heard strange sounds around the chamber. Some aliens were making clicking noises. Others were changing colors rapidly. A few started shaking. Then Kim Sora, a woman from the Human Trade Department, stood up. "I disagree with Park Min-ho," she said. "The tax rates are fair. We need this money to build better space stations." Park Min-ho turned to look at her. "But Kim Sora, you're not thinking about the farmers on Kepler 7. They can barely afford to send their crops to other worlds now." "The farmers will be fine," Kim Sora replied. "They can find other ways to make money." "That's not realistic," Park Min-ho shot back. "Have you ever visited Kepler 7? The soil is terrible. Farming is all they can do." As the two humans talked back and forth, the aliens in the chamber became more upset. The insect-like beings started buzzing loudly. The rock creatures began pulsing with red light. Some of the water beings started swimming in circles very fast. Vexathara's crystal body was flashing different colors. Kang Ho could see that the alien was trying to stay calm, but it was having trouble. Finally, Vexathara spoke in a shaky voice. "The human representatives will please stop their discussion for now." Park Min-ho and Kim Sora looked surprised. "We weren't fighting," Park Min-ho said. "We were just talking about the trade rules." "We know," Vexathara replied. "But the other species need a break." Kang Ho watched as many aliens left their seats. Some went to special calm-down rooms at the sides of the chamber. Others put on strange helmets that seemed to help them relax. A few just sat very still with their eyes closed. "What just happened?" Kang Ho asked Li Yuna. "That," she said, "is why humans are different. We can disagree without getting scared or angry. Most other species can't do that." "But they were just having a normal conversation," Kang Ho said. Normal for us, Lee Yuna agreed. But for them, hearing two beings argue is like watching a fight to the death. Their bodies think they're in danger. After 20 minutes, most of the aliens came back to their seats. The meeting continued, but now everyone was very careful to speak quietly and agree with each other. During the break, Vexithara floated over to the human section. Its crystal body was still flickering with worried colors. Ambassador Lee Yuna, Vexithara said. May I ask you something? Of course, Lee Yuna replied. How do your people do that? How do you argue without wanting to hurt each other? Lee Yuna thought for a moment. I guess we learned that fighting with words is better than fighting with weapons. We can disagree and still be friends. Vexithara's colors shifted to what Kang Ho guessed was confusion. This is very hard for us to understand. In my species, if two beings disagree strongly, one of them usually dies. That's terrible, Kang Ho said without thinking. Not terrible, Vexithara explained. Natural. We are made this way. But you humans, you are made differently. As the day went on, Kang Ho began to understand. Humans could argue, debate, and disagree without their bodies going into panic mode. They could listen to different ideas without feeling threatened. Most importantly, they could change their minds when they heard good reasons. The other species couldn't do any of these things. Their evolutionary history had taught them that disagreement meant danger. So they had to agree with each other all the time, even when they knew the decisions were wrong. At the end of the meeting, Lee Yuna and Kang Ho walked out together. So we're like the official arguers of the galaxy? Kang Ho asked. Something like that, Lee Yuna said. It's a big responsibility. Sometimes I wonder if we're doing it right. What do you mean? Lee Yuna stopped walking and looked serious. Think about it, Kang Ho. We're the only ones who can question decisions. We're the only ones who can point out problems. If we make mistakes, the whole galaxy suffers. Kang Ho felt the weight of her words. He looked back at the Senate building, thinking about all those alien species who depended on humans to speak up for them. No pressure, right? He said with a nervous laugh. Lee Yuna smiled. Welcome to galactic politics, Kang Ho. Try not to start any wars on your first week. Nam Ji-hoon sat in his laboratory on Research Station Alpha, looking at brain scans of different alien species. As a xenobiologist, his job was to understand how other life forms worked. But today, he was trying to solve a puzzle that had bothered him for months. Computer, show me the Rylixian nervous system again, he said. A three-dimensional image appeared in front of him. The Rylixian brain looked like a complex network of tubes and chambers. Nam Ji-hoon had been studying it for weeks, trying to understand why these insect-like beings couldn't handle disagreement. His research assistant, a young woman named Choi Yoonji, walked into the lab carrying a stack of files. I have the psychological reports you wanted, she said. But I have to warn you, some of them are pretty disturbing. Nam Ji-hoon took the files and opened the first one. It was about a Rylixian diplomat who had suffered a complete nervous breakdown after watching two humans argue about lunch choices. The alien had started molting uncontrollably and couldn't stop for 3 days. This doesn't make sense, Nam Ji-hoon said. They're intelligent beings. They have advanced technology. Why does simple disagreement affect them so badly? Choi Yoonji sat down and pulled up another file on her tablet. I think I found part of the answer. Look at this evolutionary history. She showed him a timeline of Rylixian development. Nam Ji-hoon read it carefully and began to understand. They evolved from hive insects, he said slowly. In their original colonies, every member had to agree perfectly with the queen. If anyone disagreed or acted differently, the whole hive would attack and kill them. Exactly, Choi Yoonji said. For millions of years, disagreement meant death. It's built into their DNA now. When they hear arguing, their bodies think they're about to die. Nam Ji-hoon moved to the next file. This one was about the Mortaki, a species that looked like large, furry creatures with big ears. The Mortaki have a different problem, Choi Yoonji explained. Their homeworld was full of giant predators that hunted by sound. If anyone in their group made loud noises or got excited, It would attract monsters that would eat the whole family. Nam. Ji-hoon shook his head in amazement. So they learned to stay quiet and calm to survive. Right. And now when they hear humans having a loud discussion, their brains think a predator is coming. They literally freeze up from terror. The next file was about the Zenith Collective, beings that looked like tall, thin creatures with smooth skin that changed colors. This one is really interesting, Choi Yoonji said. The Zenith beings communicate through chemical smells that come from their skin. When they get emotional, they release pheromones. What's wrong with that? Nam Ji-hoon asked. Well, if one of them gets too excited or angry, they release chemicals that are poisonous to other Zenith beings. So their entire culture is based on staying calm and emotionally neutral. Getting into an argument could literally kill their friends and family. Nam Ji-hoon sat back in his chair. No wonder they're terrified when they see humans argue. They think we're trying to poison each other. Choi. Yoonji opened another file. The Korthak Empire is different again. They evolved from pack hunters like wolves. In their society, only the alpha leader is allowed to make decisions. If anyone else speaks up with a different idea, it means they're challenging for leadership. And what happens then? Fight 2, the death or exile from the pack. Either way, disagreement means the end of your life in the group. Nam Ji-hoon was beginning to see a pattern. Each alien species had evolved in environments where disagreement, loud voices, or emotional responses were deadly. Over millions of years, their brains had developed to avoid these situations at all costs. But what about humans? He asked. Why are we different? Choi Yoonji smiled and pulled up a file about Earth's history. That's where it gets interesting. Humans evolved in small groups that had to work together to survive. But we didn't have one single leader like the Korthak, and we weren't connected like a hive mind like the Rylixians. She showed him pictures of early human societies. Our ancestors had to make group decisions about where to hunt, where to live, how to share food. The groups that could argue and discuss different ideas were more successful than the groups that just followed one leader blindly. So disagreement helped us survive, Nam Ji-hoon said. Exactly. The human groups that could argue, test ideas, and change their minds when they found better solutions were the ones that lived through famines, wars, and disasters. The groups that couldn't adapt died out. Nam Ji-hoon looked at brain scans of humans compared to the alien species. The human brain had larger areas for language processing and emotional control. Humans could get angry or excited without their bodies shutting down from fear. There's something else, Choi Yoonji said, pulling up another file. I found some classified records from when humans first joined the galactic community. The file was marked with security warnings, but Choi Yoonji had special clearance for her research. What does it say? Nam Ji-hoon asked. It's pretty shocking. In the first year of human membership, 3 alien species almost went extinct just from watching human diplomatic meetings. Nam Ji-hoon's eyes went wide. What happened? There was a trade discussion where 2 human ambassadors had a friendly argument about shipping routes. They were smiling and joking while they disagreed. But the alien observers thought they were watching a life-or-death battle. Choi Yoonji showed him medical reports from that day. 57 Rylixians started molting uncontrollably. 112 more Taki went into catatonic shock. 38 Zenith beings almost poisoned themselves from stress chemicals. That's horrible, Nam Ji-hoon said. It gets worse. The panic spread to their homeworlds through communication networks. Entire cities of aliens started experiencing mass hysteria. Some Rylixian hives began attacking their own members. More Taki families stopped talking completely. Zenith communities started wearing protective gear to avoid their own pheromones. Nam Ji-hoon sat in stunned silence. He had known that aliens found human behavior disturbing, but he hadn't realized how dangerous it was for them. So what did the galactic government do? He asked. They almost banned humans from all diplomatic meetings, Choi Yoonji said. There were serious discussions about forcing humans to undergo surgery to make them more like other species. Surgery? Brain modifications to remove our ability to argue or disagree. Chemical treatments to make us more compliant and peaceful. Nam Ji-hoon felt sick thinking about it, but that would make us not human anymore. Exactly. Luckily, a few smart alien leaders realized that might be a mistake. They started studying human societies and found something interesting. Choi Eun-ji pulled up historical records of human civilizations. They found that human societies that stopped arguing and disagreeing eventually collapsed. When everyone had to agree all the time, they couldn't adapt to new problems. She showed him examples from Earth's history. Dictatorships that silenced opposition fell apart when they faced challenges. Societies that encouraged debate and discussion were more successful in the long run. So our ability to argue actually makes our society stronger, Nam Ji-hoon said. Right. And some alien leaders began to wonder if that might be useful for the galaxy too. Nam Ji-hoon looked at all the research spread across his desk. The evidence was clear. Humans were the only species in the galaxy that could handle disagreement without psychological or physical trauma, but that same ability had nearly caused several species to go extinct just from observation. This explains why we have special privileges in the Senate, he said. We're not just allowed to argue freely. We're the only ones who can do it safely. Choi Eun-ji nodded. But it also means we have a huge responsibility. We're the galaxy's only source of opposition, questioning, and alternative ideas. Nam Ji-hoon thought about all the alien species he had studied. Each one was intelligent and accomplished. In their own way, they had built amazing technologies and beautiful civilizations, but they all shared the same weakness. They couldn't safely disagree with each other. So if we humans ever lost our ability to argue, he said slowly, the entire galaxy would become an echo chamber. And echo chambers, Choi Eun-ji said, are where civilizations go to die. Oh Tae-hyun stood alone in his office looking out at the lights of Nexus Prime City. As the human Senate leader, he carried a weight that no other being in the galaxy could understand. Every day, he had to be the voice that said no when everyone else said yes. He had to point out problems when everyone wanted to believe everything was perfect. His assistant knocked on the door. Sir, the morning briefing is ready. Tae-hyun sighed and walked to his desk. The briefing was always the same, a list of decisions the galactic government wanted to make, and his job was to find the problems with them. Today's big issue was about food distribution to the outer colonies. The plan looked good on paper. It would send surplus food from rich worlds to poor ones. Every alien species had already agreed it was a wonderful idea. But Tae-hyun could see the flaws. The shipping routes would take too long. The food would spoil before it reached hungry families. The plan would waste billions of credits and help no one. In 3 hours, he would have to stand in front of the entire Senate and explain why their perfect plan was actually terrible. The aliens would become upset and scared when he disagreed with them. Some would need medical attention. Others would have to leave the room, and it was all necessary, because he was the only one who could do it. Meanwhile, across the city, Minji was discovering something that made her blood run cold. As a human negotiator, she often worked with alien governments on trade deals. But today, she had stumbled across a secret meeting. The meeting was between representatives from 12 different species. They called themselves the Hegemony of Silence, and they had a plan to make humans safer for galactic society. Minji hid behind a large plant and listened as the aliens talked. The humans are too unpredictable, said a Rylixian delegate. Their arguing causes stress to our entire population. We lose productivity every time they have a discussion, agreed a Mortaki representative. Our workers become too frightened to focus on their jobs. I have a solution, said a being Minji didn't recognize. It looked like a floating jellyfish with glowing tentacles. My scientists have developed a chemical compound. We could add it to the human water supply on their residential stations. What would it do? Asked the Rylixian. It would make them more agreeable. They would still be able to think and work, but they wouldn't feel the need to argue or disagree. They would become more like us. Minji felt her heart racing. They wanted to drug humans to make them compliant. It would solve the aliens' comfort problem, but it would also remove the only source of opposition in the galaxy. When would we implement this plan? Asked the Mortaki. Next month during the water system maintenance on Station Alpha. The humans won't even know it's happening. Minji carefully backed away from the meeting and ran to her communication device. She had to warn the other humans immediately. At the same time, in the Galactic Archives, a human scientist named Yu Jiwan was making a disturbing discovery of her own. She had been researching the history of extinct civilizations, trying to understand why some societies survived while others disappeared. The pattern she found was terrifying. Every single extinct galactic civilization had achieved something called perfect consensus before they died. This meant that all members of their society agreed on everything. There was no argument, no debate, no opposing voices. Jiwan pulled up records of the Valix Empire, which had been destroyed 3,000 years ago. For their last 500 years, every citizen agreed on every decision. They all supported the same policies. They all believed the same ideas. When a plague hit their homeworld, they couldn't adapt because no one was allowed to suggest different solutions. When their economy started failing, no one could point out the problems because that would mean disagreeing with the consensus. When their enemies attacked, they couldn't change their tactics because their strategy had been agreed upon by everyone. Their Valix Empire died because they had lost the ability to argue with themselves. Jiwan found similar stories about the Theron Republic, the Unity of Minds, and the Eternal Accord. All of them had achieved perfect agreement among their people. All of them had gone extinct shortly afterward. She was so absorbed in her research that she almost didn't notice the floating alien beside her desk. It was Quinteral, a gas-based historian who worked in the same archives. "Human Jiwan," Quinteral said in its wispy voice. "May I ask what you are studying?" "Extinct civilizations," Jiwan replied. "I'm trying to understand why they died out." Quinteral's misty form shifted. With what Jiwan had learned was curiosity. "And what have you discovered?" Jiwan hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should share her findings with an alien. But Quinteral had always been kind to her, and maybe it was important for non-humans to understand this too. They all stopped arguing. She said simply, "Stopped arguing?" Quinteral repeated. "But arguing is disturbing, harmful. Why would stopping it be bad?" Jiwan showed Quinteral the record she had found. "Look at this pattern. Every extinct civilization went through the same process. First they would have wars and conflicts. Then they would decide that disagreement was the problem. They would create laws and systems to make everyone agree. Finally, they would achieve perfect harmony." "That sounds wonderful," Quinteral said. "But then they died," Jiwan pointed out. "Every single one. Because when everyone agrees all the time, no one can point out mistakes. No one can suggest new ideas. No one can adapt when things change." Quinteral was quiet for a long time. Its gaseous form swirled as it thought. "Are you saying," it finally asked, "that the human ability to argue is what keeps civilizations alive?" "I think so," Jiwan said. "And I think that's why the current galactic government is working, not because everyone agrees, but because humans are allowed to disagree." Back in the Senate building, Taehyun was getting ready for the day's session. He had studied the food distribution plan and prepared his arguments against it. He knew that pointing out the flaws would upset hundreds of alien delegates. He knew that some species would need medical care after hearing him speak. But he also knew that if he didn't speak up, millions of beings in the outer colonies would starve while their food rotted in space. His communication device buzzed with an urgent message from On Minji. As he read about the hegemony of silence and their plan to drug the human water supply, Taehyun felt a chill run down his spine. If the aliens succeeded in making humans more compliant, it wouldn't just change human nature. It would remove the galaxy's only defense against groupthink and bad decisions. Taehyun made a decision. He wouldn't just argue against the food distribution plan today. He would also expose the conspiracy to drug humans. It would cause the biggest diplomatic crisis in galactic history. Aliens would faint, panic, and flee the chamber. But it was necessary. When the Senate session began, Taehyun walked to the speaking platform with heavy steps. He looked out at the hundreds of alien delegates, knowing that his words would terrify them. "Friends and colleagues," he began, "today I must tell." You three things that you will not want to hear. Already some aliens were shifting nervously in their seats. First, the food distribution plan will fail. The shipping routes are too slow, and the food will spoil before it reaches the colonies. A wave of clicking, buzzing, and color changing swept through the chamber. Several Rylixians started molting. The Mortaki began their freezing response. Second, Taehyun continued, raising his voice, there is a conspiracy to drug the human water supply to make us more compliant. Now the real panic began. Aliens started fleeing for the exits. Medical teams rushed to help species that were going into shock. And third, Taehyun shouted over the chaos, if you succeed in silencing human voices, this galaxy will follow the same path as every other civilization that achieved perfect consensus. You will all die. By the time he finished speaking, half the chamber was empty. The remaining aliens stared at him in terror and confusion. But Vexithara, the crystal being who kept records, was still there. Its body was flashing rapidly with different colors, but it was listening. Human Taehyun, Vexithara said in a shaking voice, what do you propose we do? Taehyun looked around the nearly empty chamber. We need to find a way for other species to handle disagreement without psychological trauma. We need to protect the human ability to argue. And most importantly, we need to remember that the goal isn't to make everyone comfortable. The goal is to make good decisions. But how? Vexithara asked. How can we learn to tolerate what terrifies us? Taehyun smiled, grimly, very carefully and very slowly. But it can be done, because the alternative is extinction. The warning came from the edge of the galaxy at exactly 1447 Galactic Standard Time. Ko Minsu was in the middle of eating lunch when every alarm in the military command center started screaming. What's happening? He asked, running to the main display screen. Unknown contacts at the galactic border, his assistant reported. Massive fleet. Technology we've never seen before. Ko Minsu studied the readings. The ships were huge, dark, and moved in perfect formation. But what scared him most was how they fought. The Galactic Defense Fleet had engaged them using standard tactics, and the unknown ships had adapted instantly. They're learning, Ko Minsu said quietly. Every time our ships use a strategy, these things figure out how to counter it. Within 6 hours, the Galactic Defense Fleet was retreating. The unknown enemy, which intelligence officers started calling the Void Swarm, was advancing toward populated systems. Emergency meetings were called on every world. The galactic government needed a plan, and they needed it fast. Han Jion, the Bao, diplomatic corps leader, found herself in the strangest situation of her career. She was sitting in a room full of terrified alien leaders, trying to convince them to let humans argue in public about battle plans. You want us to listen to humans? Fight about strategy? Asked the Relixian Supreme Commander. Its antennae were twitching with stress. During a war? That's exactly what I want, Han Jion said calmly. Our normal method isn't working. We plan one strategy, everyone agrees to it, and the Void Swarm counters it perfectly. We need something unpredictable. A Mortaki general spoke up, its voice barely above a whisper. But hearing humans argue during a crisis will cause mass panic. Our soldiers won't be able to function. Han Jion had expected this response. Then we'll set up the meetings in special chambers. Your people can listen through audio only, with dampening filters to reduce the emotional impact. Or you can just read transcripts later. The aliens looked at each other nervously. This was the most dangerous idea they had ever heard. But they were also desperate. Meanwhile, in space, Shin Do-yun was preparing for the strangest mission of his life. As a fighter pilot, he was used to following clear orders and working with his squadron in perfect coordination. Today, he was being asked to do the opposite. So let me understand this, he said to his commanding officer. You want my squadron to argue with each other during the battle? Not exactly argue, the officer explained, but you should use different tactics at the same time. Confuse the enemy. Make them unable to predict what you're doing. Shin Do-hyun shook his head. That sounds like a good way to get killed. Maybe, but following predictable patterns is definitely a good way to get killed. The Void Swarm has destroyed every fleet that used standard tactics. 2 hours later, Shin Do-yun was flying toward the enemy with 5 other human pilots. Their orders were simple. Be chaotic. Blue Squadron, this is Leader, he said into his radio. Remember, we're not trying to work together perfectly. We're trying to be confusing. Roger that, came the reply from Pilot Park Subin. This feels wrong, but I'll try. The battle began unlike any other in galactic history. Instead of the usual coordinated attacks, the human ships seemed to fight independently. Some used aggressive tactics while others hung back. Some flew in formation while others broke off on their own. To the Void Swarm, it looked like chaos. Their adaptation algorithms couldn't figure out what the humans were trying to do because the humans themselves kept changing their minds. Leader, I think we should hit their left flank, Park Subin said over the radio. No, the right side looks weaker, replied Pilot Kim Jun-ho. You're both wrong, added Pilot Lee Hana. We should attack from above. How about we split up and try all 3, suggested Shin Do-yun. This kind of radio chatter would have sent alien crews into complete psychological meltdown. But for humans, it was just another day of making decisions under pressure. The Void Swarm ships started making mistakes. They would turn to counter one human attack, only to be hit by another from a different direction. They would adapt to defensive tactics, then face aggressive ones. They would prepare for coordinated strikes, then face individual fighters doing completely different things. For the first time since the invasion began, a galactic fleet was winning. Back on Nexus Prime, the alien commanders were watching the Yachter battle through monitors with mixed feelings. They were excited about the victory, but terrified by the human communication they were hearing. Zeph Morix, a cephalopod-like commander from the Aquatic Alliance, was the only alien brave enough to watch the full video feed. Its tentacles were wrapped around medical devices that helped control its stress responses. How do they do it? Zeph Morix asked Han Jian. How do they argue and fight at the same time without falling apart? Practice, Han Jian said simply. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We argue with our families at breakfast, then work together to build houses. We disagree with our leaders, then follow them into battle. For us, arguing and cooperating aren't opposites. Zeph Morix's skin changed to a pattern that indicated deep confusion. This is the most alien thing about your species. Not your appearance, not your technology. This ability to fight with words and still trust each other. The space battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, the Void Swarm had retreated to regroup. The galactic fleet had suffered losses, but they had achieved something that seemed impossible. They had confused an enemy that could adapt to any predictable strategy. Ko Min-soo was analyzing the battle reports when he realized something important. The human ships hadn't just been random in their tactics. They had been chaotic in a very human way. Look at this pattern, he told his staff. The pilots were arguing, but they were arguing about real tactical problems. They weren't just being random. They were having the same kind of strategic debate we have in planning meetings, but at light speed in the middle of a battle. One of his officers, a young woman named Song Mirai, studied the data. So they were essentially turning the battlefield into a fast-moving discussion forum. Exactly. And because the Void Swarm couldn't predict the outcome of human discussions, they couldn't counter our tactics. Ko Min-soo started developing a new strategy. Instead of trying to create chaos, they would create organized discord. Human fleets would be divided into debate teams. Each team would argue for different approaches to the same problem. Then they would implement multiple strategies simultaneously. It was the most unmilitary approach to warfare in galactic history, but it was also the only thing that worked against an enemy that could adapt to any single plan. The next major battle took place near the agricultural world of New Harvest. This time, Ko Min-soo commanded a fleet where different squadrons were literally debating strategy over open communication channels while fighting. Alpha Squadron, we should protect the orbital farms, announced squadron leader Im Yejin. Negative. Alpha, replied Beta Squadron leader Hwang Taemin. The farms are already lost, we should focus on the evacuation ships. Both of you are thinking too small, added Gamma Squadron leader Seo Young-min. We should hit their command ship and end this quickly. All three squadrons proceeded to implement their different strategies at the same time. The Void Swarm, expecting a unified response, found themselves facing three completely different attacks that somehow supported each other. Watching from the command ship, Zeph Morix was slowly learning to tolerate human argument patterns. The alien commander had undergone weeks of therapy and was using advanced medical equipment to control its stress responses. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Zeph Morix told Ko Minsu. "Your arguing isn't about winning or losing. It's about finding truth through conflict." "Right," Ko Minsu agreed. "We don't argue to defeat each other. We argue to defeat bad ideas." The battle was another victory for the Galactic Fleet, but more importantly, it proved that the human method could work on a larger scale. Other species were starting to understand that human discord wasn't a sign of weakness or aggression. It was a tool for solving problems that couldn't be solved any other way. After the battle, Zeph Morix made a request that shocked everyone. "Commander Ko Minsu," the alien said, "I want to learn how to argue like a human." Ko Minsu stared at the alien commander. "Are you sure? It might be dangerous for your health." "Dangerous, yes," Zeph Morix agreed, "but not as dangerous as extinction. If we're going to survive this war, some of us need to learn your ways." It was the first time in galactic history that an alien had volunteered to undergo human-style discord training. The medical risks were enormous. The psychological stress could kill Zeph Morix, but the alternative was losing the war. "All right," Ko Minsu said, "but we start very slowly, and you'll need a medical team standing by at all times." As he looked out at the stars where the Void Swarm was regrouping for their next attack, Ko Minsu realized that this war was changing everything. Humans weren't just fighting for the galaxy's survival. They were teaching other species that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is agree with everyone. 1 year after the Void Swarm War ended, Lim Xiangho stood at the podium of the newly renovated Galactic Senate Chamber. As the first human chancellor in galactic history, he was about to address the largest gathering of alien species ever assembled. The chamber looked very different now. Along the walls were special safe zones where aliens could retreat if human discussions became too intense. Sound-dampening fields could be activated at any seat. Medical teams stood ready to help species that experienced stress reactions. But, most importantly, there was a new section in the center of the chamber marked Designated Opposition Zone. This was where humans would present alternative viewpoints to any proposal under discussion. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Lim Xiangho began, "we gather today to celebrate not our victory over the Void Swarm, but our victory over our own limitations." In the audience, Zeph Morix sat in the front row. The alien commander now wore a special medical suit that helped regulate its stress responses. After months of careful training, Zeph Morix had become the first non-human to successfully participate in a human-style debate, though it still required constant medical monitoring. Beside Zeph Morix sat Vexithera, the crystal being who had documented everything from the beginning. Its body flickered with colors that Lim Xiangho had learned meant fascinated attention. "A year ago," Lim Xiangho continued, "our galaxy faced extinction because we had created a system where everyone agreed on everything. We were strong in unity but weak in wisdom. Today we have something new. We call it the Human Protocol." John Soo-young, the head of the new Department of Constructive Disagreement, stood up from her seat. This was her cue to explain how the new system worked. "The Human Protocol is simple," she said. "For every major decision, humans will present at least 3 different viewpoints. Other species can choose to listen, participate at their comfort level, or simply wait for the summary reports." She gestured to a group of alien volunteers sitting in a special section. "We also have brave volunteers from 17 species who are undergoing gradual exposure therapy. They're learning to tolerate small amounts of disagreement in controlled environments." One of these volunteers was Morthek, a young Mortaki, who had signed up for the program despite the risks to its health. Morthek had been working with human trainers for 6 months, slowly building up tolerance to argumentative speech. "At first," Morthek said in its quiet voice, "listening to humans argue made me freeze completely. I couldn't move or think, but now I can handle discussions about simple topics like food preferences or weather patterns. The progress was slow, but it was real progress. For the first time in galactic history, non-humans were learning to participate in debate without psychological trauma. No Hyunwoo, a human philosopher who had studied the broader implications of the human protocol, stood to address the chamber. "We've learned something important about intelligence and survival," he said. "It's not enough to be smart. You also need to be able to argue with yourself. Civilizations die when they become too comfortable with their own ideas." He showed holographic displays of Earth's history. Humans had constant conflicts, wars, and disagreements. We thought this was our weakness, but it was actually our strength. We learned to fight with ideas instead of just weapons. We learned to change our minds when we found better solutions. In the back of the chamber, Won Junga watched the proceedings with special interest. She was the result of an experimental program that combined human and alien genetics through advanced therapy. Part human, part Zenith Collective, she represented a possible future where beings could have the best traits of multiple species. Won Junga could engage in limited debate like a human, but she also had the emotional stability of the Zenith beings. She was still the only successful hybrid of her kind, but she gave hope that someday, other species might naturally develop the ability to handle disagreement. The session continued with a demonstration of the new decision-making process. The topic was funding for colony expansion, something that would have been decided by unanimous agreement under the old system. Human representatives immediately split into 3 groups. One argued for rapid expansion, one argued for careful planning, and one argued for focusing on existing colonies first. The debate that followed would have caused mass hysteria a year earlier. Voices were raised, hands were waved, and at one point, Representative Kim Dae-yeon accused Representative Yoon Jae-ho of having the strategic vision of a nearsighted space slug. But instead of chaos, something remarkable happened. The alien delegates watched with manageable stress levels. Some used their dampening equipment, others retreated to the safe zones. But most importantly, they stayed and listened. When the debate ended, the aliens had 3 detailed plans to consider instead of one plan that everyone had to accept without question. Vexithera raised one crystalline appendage to speak. "This is still very disturbing to watch," it admitted, "but I understand now why it's necessary." The humans found flaws in all 3 plans. The final solution combines the best ideas from each approach. Zephmorix, still wearing its medical suit, managed to add a comment. "On my homeworld, we would have chosen the first plan presented and never questioned it. Many beings would have suffered from our mistakes. The real test came when a new crisis emerged. Pirates had taken control of a mining station in the Outer Rim. Under the old system, the Galactic Fleet would have used their standard response: surround the station and wait for the pirates to surrender. But the new protocol required human opposition voices. "The standard siege approach won't work," argued Commander Park Jin-hyuk. "These aren't ordinary pirates. They have hostages and advanced weapons." "A siege is exactly what we need," countered Commander Nam Soo-jin. "Rushing in will get innocent people killed." "You're both wrong," said a third human commander, Ryu Minho. "We should offer to negotiate. Find out what they really want." The debate that followed was intense, conducted over open communication channels that all Allied ships could hear. Alien crews used their stress management equipment, but they listened. The final plan combined all 3 approaches: a careful siege with negotiation attempts and rapid response teams ready for rescue operations. It worked perfectly. The hostages were saved, the pirates were captured, and no Allied personnel were lost. "This would not have been possible under our old consensus system," admitted Admiral Thexavara of the Stellar Concordium. "We would have used our standard approach and failed." As Lim Seong-ho's speech continued, he addressed the biggest challenge they still faced. "We know that some species may never be able to participate in direct debate," he said. "Their evolutionary history makes it too dangerous, but they can still benefit from human discourse by observing the results." He gestured to a new section of the chamber where AI systems were processing human arguments in real time. creating simplified summaries for species that couldn't handle the full intensity of human debate. We're not trying to make everyone argue, like humans, Lim Seong-ho explained. We're trying to make sure that human arguing serves everyone's needs. Quinteral, the gas-based historian, floated forward to speak. Its misty form swirled with what looked like excitement. I have been studying galactic history for 3,000 years, Quinteral said. In all that time, I have never seen a period of more rapid positive change than this past year. New technologies, better policies, more efficient trade routes, all because we finally have a system that can question itself. The session ended with a moment that would have been impossible under the old system. Representative Lee Dae-ho stood up and said, I think Chancellor Lim Seong-ho made some good points today, but I disagree with his timeline for implementing new protocols. A year earlier, this kind of public disagreement with a leader would have caused panic. Today it caused something else, thoughtful consideration. Several aliens activated their dampening fields, but they stayed to hear the discussion. Zeph Morix actually managed to ask a clarifying question. Even Morthek, the young Mortaki, didn't freeze completely. As beings filed out of the chamber, Lim Seong-ho reflected on how much had changed. Humans were no longer the scary aliens who caused psychological trauma just by talking. They were the galaxy's designated contrarians, the official source of alternative viewpoints, the guardians against groupthink. It was a huge responsibility, but it was also an honor. Vexathara approached the podium as the chamber emptied. Chancellor Lim Seong-ho, the crystal being said, May I ask you something personal? Of course, do. You ever wish humans could be more like other species, more agreeable and peaceful? Lim Seong-ho considered the question carefully. Sometimes, he admitted. It would be easier if we could all just get along without arguments, but easy isn't always right. He looked around the chamber, with its safe zones and medical equipment and AI translation systems. All of it existed because humans couldn't help but disagree with each other. Our arguing has caused a lot of problems, he said. But it's also solved even more problems. And in a galaxy where civilizations die from too much agreement, I think a little disagreement is exactly what we need. Vexathara's colors shifted to what Lim Seong-ho recognized as deep thought. Perhaps, the alien said slowly, the universe created humans to argue with it. As Lim Seong-ho walked out of the chamber,